All of these objects are separate. Nothing is joined. And there are no collections in this scene either. And yet, everything is very well organized and structured. This is achieved by parenting objects to empties. The group tool set in MACHIN3tools then provides a number of tools to make this parenting and related tasks very easy. All of this is heavily inspired by how groups work in Maya. I highly recommend you watch this video by Andrew Hodgson to better understand why collections in Blender are not a real alternative to groups in Maya. The empty-based parenting approach in MACHIN3tools is a very workable technique and addresses the limitations of Blender's collections as a grouping tool. That is not to say they replace collections, which are very useful too. Both approaches are just different, and not mutually exclusive techniques to organize your scene. They actually complement each other very well. The Deus Ex version of MACHIN3tools goes a step further and offers a way to easily create very simple pseudo-rigs from groups, which allow you to precisely rotate group empties without having to make any selections. Now, to start using the group tools in MACHIN3tools, you need to first have them activated in the add-on preferences. Doing so will also unlock some preferences, which I'll talk about at the end. Under the right conditions, various group tools will then be present in the Object Context menu. A few of these have key maps too. To create a group, have at least one object selected, and choose Group from the menu, or press Ctrl-G. If your outliner is set up to show parenting, you can verify that the selected objects are now parented to a newly created empty. By default, group empties will be invisible when they aren't selected, so as to not clutter the viewport. You can disable this at any time. And as for the group tools, you can access these settings from the context menu or the sidebar. In the sidebar, you can even determine if these settings should appear in the context menu. The group Gizmo toggle only applies to Deus Ex, so I'm going to talk about this later and turn it off for now. The context menu tries to be smart, and will only show relevant options to you, to save space. The available tools will depend on your selection. By grouping this cube, I've now created a subgroup under the previous one. As you can see, the group object itself can be transformed independently from the group empty. And this subgroup's empty is itself just a group object, so a child of the initial group's empty. The Select Group tool is powerful and allows you to select all a group's objects simply by selecting any one of them and running the tool. It will also attempt to make the group's empty the active object. For convenience, the Select Group tool is mapped to Shift double-click by default. You can name a group after selecting it, directly from the 3D view in the context menu, by renaming the active object, which, as I just mentioned, should be the group's empty. And of course, you can also name groups from the outliner. By default, a prefix and suffix will be added to your chosen name. This is done to distinguish group empties from other empties. You can change or disable this in the add-on preferences. I'm now creating a second subgroup on this side as well. followed by yet another subgroup below it. Let's talk about these toggles now. With auto-select enabled, machine tools will select all a group's objects as soon as the group empty is made active. This is useful as it provides visual feedback directly in the viewport about which objects belong to a group. Especially, but not only, when a group is selected from the outliner. Note that this only affects the direct group objects belonging to the active empty. With the recursive toggle then, the selection will also include everything below that group, all the way down the entire hierarchy. The recursive toggle will also affect the behavior of the select group tool accordingly. Anyway, by default all of these toggles are enabled, which should suit most people and workflows, most of the time. Sometimes, with group empties hidden, it's not always easy to select a group in the 3D view, especially if all its objects are just other subgroup empties. At times like this, know that you can use Blender's Select Parent from the Shift-G menu to move up in the group hierarchy. So far we've only created groups. But there are times when you want to destroy them too. This is done using the Ungroup tool. After ungrouping, the group empty will have been removed, and the objects will no longer be parented. If I now create a new group again, you can see how it no longer belongs to the root group. One way to add the new group to the root group again is by shift-dragging it in the outliner. However, you can see that now every single selected object has been directly parented to the root group. This means that the two cubes now belong to the root group, as they are no longer parented to their previous empty. I'm undoing the parenting in the outliner now. So, if you want to reorganize groups in the outliner, you have to first disable auto-select. You only want to change the hierarchy for the group's empty, not for all its objects. Conveniently, auto-select can also be toggled in the outliner directly. And as you can see, all the relationships are maintained now. By the way, the quickest way to ungroup is by bringing up the context menu and pressing the X key. Another way to add this group to the root group is by using the Add to Group tool. For clarity, I'm turning off auto-select, but you don't have to. After selecting the group, you just need to shift-select the other group's empty. Then run the Add to Group tool. Note that in the outliner, you would have to Control-select the root group's empty to make it active. This way you could leave the group empties hidden while doing this. Instead of adding an entire group to another one, you can of course also add any number of objects to an existing group. To do so, just make a selection, then shift-select any object of the target group, and call the Add to Group tool. Let's repeat that. You can do this quickly, by bringing up the context menu, followed by pressing the A key. And it doesn't matter if an object belongs to a group already either. You can easily move objects from one group to another this way. And it's just as easy to remove objects from groups using the Remove from Group tool. Note that, if you remove all a group's objects, the group itself will be dissolved as well. Now, at some point you may encounter a situation like this, where even with auto-select enabled, a group just won't be selected, even though it's clearly part of the active group. This can happen when you change the parenting in the outliner. Because when doing this, MACHIN3tools doesn't automatically know about the change. To solve this, just run any of the group tools. Select Group makes the most sense and is probably the easiest. You can even see a message in the terminal about what just happened. And now auto-select works as expected again. If you want to duplicate an entire group, you can do it simply with Blender's native duplicate tool, as long as you really have the entire group hierarchy selected. If not, then Blender's duplicate tool will fail. But you can always use the duplicate group tool in its place. It's smart enough to know that you want to duplicate the entire group. If you hold down the Alt key, it will create instances of the individual mesh objects, but note that the group itself is still unique and not an instance of the other group. There is another way to create groups in MACHIN3tools that can be especially useful when you import from an external application. As long as you have a parented hierarchy using empties, then you can always use the Groupify tool to turn them into groups as MACHIN3tools understands them. So, as I don't have anything to import right now, I'm just manually setting up such a hierarchy here. Obviously, Shift double-click doesn't work yet, as this is not a group yet. And none of the group tools are available either. But once you select the root empty, you can call the Groupify tool. And there you go, groups. Let's take a quick look at the group preferences now. As shown previously, the group tools will by default show up directly in the object context menu. And MACHIN3tools will try to minimize what is shown at any time to reduce clutter. But you can also choose to move all the group tools into a sub-menu. In that case, it will mirror the behavior in the sidebar and show every tool, although some of them will be grayed out depending on your selection. You can also disable the auto-select, recursive and empty visibility toggles shown in the outliner. Next are settings for the group auto-naming. You can choose a base name, you can optionally set a prefix and suffix, or you can disable the prefix and suffix completely. Finally, you have some control over the sizes of group empties. There is a base empty size you can choose. Beyond the base size, MACHIN3tools will by default also use smaller sizes for group empties further down the hierarchy. And you can tweak that behavior here. All of these group empties are the same size here. But now they get smaller the further down they are in the hierarchy. In addition to the group and select group keys, MACHIN3tools will also create 4 key mappings for the outliner. The keys used by default are 1, 2, 3 and 4. Easily accessed using the left hand. Just like at the beginning, you can see all objects of this scene in a huge list. But once you press the 1 key, you switch into what I call group mode. All this really does is adjust the outliner display settings to only show empties and enable parent-child hierarchies. If you have non-group empties in the scene, they will of course also be shown, but otherwise, all you will see is groups. This makes it very easy to view and select specific subgroups. Note that, as mentioned before, if you want to rearrange groups here, you need to disable auto-select first. You may also need to hold down the Alt key. Pressing 1 again will go back to showing all objects, but won't disable parenting. Using the 4 key then, you can toggle just the display of parenting, so you'll either see a flat list, or the proper hierarchy. And when you have parenting enabled, you can use the 2 and 3 keys to unfold and collapse the hierarchies. Pretty convenient. I forgot to mention it earlier, but if you create a new group, you can determine where the group empty is being placed in the Operator Properties panel. I barely use this myself, because you can easily adjust the empty's location and rotation relative to the rest of the group later. This ability to change the empty location and rotation, without affecting the group objects, makes grouping a powerful tool if you intend to rig or animate your design. You can do this from a few different places. MACHIN3tools' own Transform Pi. The transform options in the Tools panel of the sidebar. Or from the Group section in the MACHIN3tools panel. Once you click on Group Origin, MACHIN3tools will disable Auto-Select, as well as enable the Parent Transform option. You can then move, rotate or even scale your group empty however you like. Just remember to turn it off again when you are done. You can even snap the empty to geometry. Concluding this, the following will be about the Group Gizmo feature, which is only available in the Deus Ex version of MACHIN3tools. All of the group empties in this mechanical hand have been carefully placed at the joints. Even without Deus Ex, this allows you to articulate the hand, just by rotating the groups. You could even set up axis locks, so you can be careless and avoid having to pick a rotation axis every time. But you still need to select the entire group or it's empty. A more convenient way is using the group Gizmos. There is a general toggle that controls the visibility of all group gizmos in the scene. And when enabled, you can customize every group by adding up to 3 rotational gizmos, 1 per axis. Usually you would pick only one though. With a group selected and a gizmo shown, you can individually control the gizmo size. And of course, with a gizmo visible, you can simply and precisely rotate the group, without making any selection. Any number of gizmos can be visible at the same time. If you take a look at the status bar, while I'm rotating, you can see some options. If you press the R key for instance, you can reset the rotation to the group's rest pose. You can do the same from the sidebar. Note that with nothing selected, this will apply to all visible groups. So in my case here, I can reset the entire hand pose at once. Also, if you reset or set the rest pose for a specific group from here, you can hold down the Alt key to do it recursively. Notice how selecting a group will switch the sidebar from all rest poses to only show settings for the selected group. Also notice that you can tell this group is in its rest pose by the white filled circle. As soon as I rotate away from the rest pose, the circle updates. You can now set a new rest pose. And just like when recalling, you do it recursively by holding the Alt key. I've shown before how you can recall a pose directly while transforming a group. Of course you can also set a rest pose in the same way, by pressing the S key. From the Group Transform tool, you can even set the group's gizmo size by scrolling your mouse. And you can also snap to 5-degree increments using the Control key. Finally, without anything selected, you can control the global group gizmo sizes. Depending on the scale you're working on, this may be useful. You can reset to the default size of 1 from the sidebar. And you can also bake the current size, which just means that the global size is reset to 1, but all the per group sizes are adjusted to keep their current size. This can be useful before storing a design as an asset. And in case you didn't realize, as with all rotation gizmos in 3D software, the further away you move your mouse from the gizmo, the more control you get.